Greetings, fellow humans. I am Hugh.
And I am Man.
And together we are definitely not
Two
kobolds in a trench coat. We enjoy human activities, such as paying taxes,
having existential crises,
and RPG horror stories. Let's see what we've got today. Today, we have an update on the Psychopath Player from a previous video, a player with major main character syndrome that verges into creepy, and a party who won't take "there is nothing here" for an answer.
I'm in a party with an absolute psychopath of a PC. He only plays psychotic PCs. Update by Reddit user DiceRoller667. TLDR for my last post. A player makes a PC named Grug, who's very much psychotic, and slaughters enemies in 1 to 2 minute increments, describing absolute immense detail. From my last post, I followed all of your advice and talked to my DM about Grug and his rather intense and disturbing behavior surrounding the brutal enemy killings every single round. He said that he would talk to him. This is where I wish the story ends, but it doesn't. We continued our journey into a bandit camp where, you guessed it, we got ambushed. 1.5 hours later, and a bunch of Grug's antics later, the entire camp was drenched in blood, Grug being very edgy about it. Meat bags need to be drained of their red oil. Oh, God.
Red oil. Okay, maybe he's just getting poetic about it.
I mean, okay, so I have a little bit of a problem with blood, but when you describe it like that, it just sounds creepy.
Yeah, you're reducing it down to effectively working on a car and a mechanical thing. Okay, look, we get it. You can have a psychotic doctor-type character who sees people as things to be engineered and stuff, but yeah, but we already know what Grug is like, so
no, yeah, this is not Human Earthworm 3. We get the MacGuffin and we start walking home. Grug, I want to cleave Nimbus, my character. I haven't seen Kobold's guts before. Nimbus, what? He rolls low. He misses. Nimbus, I run away from the party and I am done with this group. Left the call, left the Discord. The sad thing is that I know some of the players IRL, so my phone has been blowing up for a day now.
This anti-kobold violence needs to end.
Yeah.
I consider myself an ally to kobolds. I am not one, of course.
No, of course not.
No, definitely not.
No.
But people really need to stop bullying kobolds.
It's time to end the violence against kobolds.
Mm-hmm.
But for real though, good job OP for making a rather poetic exit. That was good. You didn't retaliate, you didn't escalate, you just ran away, left the Discord, boom, done.
I'm disappointed that they are the one who had to leave rather than the DM stepping in to defend them and reigning Grug.
Yeah, something tells me that the DM ratted on OP to Grug.
Possibly. They clearly were aware that something had been said there that they then specifically targeted the player who had a word with the DM about it.
I mean, based on the previous post, it sounds like that last bandit camp encounter was extra gory, like extra gory, and then he turns and attacks the person who was complaining about his goriness.
I would like another update on this at some point. I would like to hear about these messages blowing up OP's phone because they didn't mention whether it was positive or negative. Given that it wasn't mentioned, the group might be reacting negative, but I really do want to hear where this actually goes after this as well, because this is interesting. I can assure you, dear DM, that the love scene was absolutely critical for my character's backstory. By Tang Koman. Back when I was DMing a lot, I used to post ads for my games with application questionnaires so that I could filter out players I thought I wouldn't really vibe with and create groups I thought would gel well. This failed spectacularly, but that's a story for another post. This one is about Bob. Bob really bamboozled me by submitting an application I thought was really good. He had a solid character idea, clearly put thought into how he would implement him into my world, and by and large, I was sold. I had a quick chat with him just to tell him how I would run the games, when session 0 was, and what I expected from his backstory, as I did with all players. I had quite a bit of lore for the world, but mostly tried to give players enough to work with without lore dumping unless specifically asked. He was aiming to play a warlock, so we talked patrons, and I sent over the basic lore details of a few so that he could draw from it for his backstory. This included a celestial who grew too prideful and was cast into the hells, and through unimportant lore, escaped and became a goddess of redemption. A minor deity who could be the matron of clerics, paladins, sorcerers, and warlocks. I sent him her character art. This turned out to be a mistake. Bob was into it. In fact, Bob was too into it. Session 0 goes by without too much issue, and Session 1 is 2 weeks later, giving players time to lock classes in and send backstories.
Yeah, I mean, you're not supposed to know that ahead of time, so obviously the DM was trying to do their due diligence, but yeah, this sounds like bad news for the deity.
Bob, you're not supposed to do that, Bob.
Bob.
It does sound like the DM did everything they could to possibly avoid too much uncomfortableness. Bob is clearly a veteran player. However, they probably didn't check something at the door that should have been checked.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing too. I can applaud the DM for having like a whole application process. I get where they're coming from, but I think Bob is going to prove the fact that you can fill out questions in the way that you know that the person wants them to be filled out.
It's like an IQ test. You can train for it and deliberately get a higher score. It's not a very good way of measuring.
I wish there was a way to determine whether or not players were going to be problematic or not. And sometimes it's really obvious. But then there's people like Bob here who clearly know how to tell DMs what they want to hear as a veteran player. So he knows how to not be a creep right off the bat. Well, I mean, before session 0, I think.
Well, Bob is now basically pestering me for details on his patron's backstory for almost a week. And while I dig enthusiasm, this seems a bit much. Then his backstory lands in my inbox. It is something. His warlock is clearly some sort of main character. He took the idea he came to me with and mashed it with every single thing he found cool in the lore. He was now a pirate and a mercenary, but is secretly the prince of a country and is also an Asimar because while his mother is the queen, his father is this world's version of Asmodeus. In this setting, a god of retribution and self-sacrifice. He kills so many people and is so tough and scary, yada yada. All of this at level 1, mind you. When he's left with nothing on account of a betrayal by his first mate, as inevitable as it is stupid. The first mate made a deal with Asmodeus, second in command to overthrow Asmodeus, and this is somehow orchestrated by trying to kill Bob's character. He is saved by the goddess of redemption, who apparently had her eye on him for a while. This would be fine-ish, except it turns into the story of how they fall in love, then a love scene, which he writes in full. It is like 30% of his entire backstory. I am deeply uncomfortable. To put a cherry on top of this sundae, the pact is formed because he is so good at love. The goddess gives him warlock powers and is now his girlfriend.
Wow, okay, that went way farther than I thought it was going to.
That took a sharp dive off a cliff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, first of all, like, I'm like half god or whatever, but then like also I'm a pirate and also like...
So a prince.
A prince and like...
Also, I'm the best at lovemaking in the entire land.
Exactly, I'm a lovemaking god.
That literal goddess wanted to be with me for it.
And gave me powers for it. The fact that 30% of his backstory was a love scene.
Erotica.
Essentially erotica.
There are places to put that sort of thing. Your backstory in a game of D&D is not one of them.
Yeah, don't put that in your DM's inbox, thank you.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to read that. I mean, some people might want to read that, and if the campaign had called for it, yes. But clearly he got overexcited about the lore and then decided, and this is actually, it can happen with some players. And I get it on a certain level. When you start out at level 1, you have to remember, like, you're level 1. You're not going to be a god.
This is one thing I try to focus on as well when DMing, making sure that my players' backstories match a level 1 character. It's important to set stuff up and potentially be important in the world, but you've got to come in matching a skill level appropriate of a level 1 to some degree, so it's believable.
That's part of it. That's what makes it fun. And when you come in being like, I'm freaking level 20, but like I'm actually level 1, you just end up frustrated.
Any one of these character points would actually be okay. It's all of them piled on top of each other that really drive home a main character syndrome.
Yeah, and then the whole lovemaking god on top of it, like, I agree with the DM. That's the cherry on top, but it's a cherry that's like, oh, no.
I inform him I want no part of this BS. He says he thought this was a game for adults. After all, I tagged that I was looking for players who were 18 plus. I explained this is because there's violence and swearing and love happens in this world. I just have no desire to engage in RPing it or reading explicit prose about it. He goes, aha, and calls me a hypocrite. I block him. The end.
What was that? Aha, you're a hypocrite. What? Why?
Got you. Caught you out there, DM.
I don't get it. Like, the DM was being perfectly reasonable. Yeah, guess what? There's adult themes. It's going to be violent, and people are probably going to use explicit language. And yes, certain adult, bow chicka wow wow stuff happens.
Yeah, don't dump that in your DM's inbox unless the campaign has explicitly said that there would be an element of that you will be delving into that stuff.
Yeah, at least ask first. Be like, listen, there's this thing with my backstory. Is it okay if I put it in? Are you comfortable with that? I made a pointless dungeon and it got out of control. By Reddit user, this is my phone though. I'm partly to blame for this because I humored it / enabled it. Even including in this first part is arguably sus. I just wanted to share. Party was sent to kill a monster. Below the dungeon was a second dungeon. The entrance had a nuclear waste warning on it. I'm not going to quote the whole thing, but it basically says that there's absolutely nothing of value here. This was intended as world building, as it tied into the dungeon's lore / reason for existing. I still quite like the concept from that perspective. Maybe it was a bit of self-sabotage. I was getting very frustrated with this group. Okay, so we're already starting out on a frustrated note with the group.
A little bit. The DM sounds a little bit exacerbated. Doesn't explain why, but maybe if you're already exacerbated, that does affect your mentality of how you look at certain things.
Party wants to check it out, so I basically render as we go. I begin describing that it is effectively a massive, endless labyrinth of repeating patterns that is absolutely infested with threats. I basically just continued with the world building. The dungeon is a cosmic waste dump of hundreds of nearly unkillable monsters. I feed information to the party that some of these threats just cheat in the game terms. The dungeon was basically designed to hold these threats in place and slowly kill them over the course of millennia.
Okay, I mean, it's an interesting concept for sure. I think that's part of the might be part of the problem here. That is too interesting. You have just tantalized a super prison filled with all kinds of exotic and very powerful monsters in there. On the one hand, you do have a sign that says, do not go in here. On the other hand, you've got so much temptation there and so much that screams high risk, high reward.
I again expected them to just confirm what it was and move on, but we spent several sessions in the dungeon. We never left this dungeon as the game disbanded during it. I repeatedly told them through lore pickups, knowledge checks, and flat out above game that it wasn't a bluff. There really isn't anything for them to do in here. I continued to render it in front of them according to the dungeon logic I laid out. One player in particular began talking, mostly in character, about wondering why they were there and trying to salvage the expedition to get something out of it so it wouldn't be just a wash.
The DM is telling them out of game, out of character, this isn't a bluff, we need to move on and leave this place, and the party still isn't buying it. So at that point, yeah, the party really does need to accept it and just leave the dungeon. Turn around, go back the way they came, and leave.
There is obviously a layer of mistrust that happens between players and DMs just naturally because of the fact that DMs don't always give you all of the information. But you also have to fundamentally trust your DM that when they say out of game, there's nothing here, you should move on, to do it.
And with that last comment, that sounds like a player fishing. It's like, okay, come on DM, we've been here for a while. Give us some magical item. Give us something good to pay us to leave. Basically, pay us to leave.
Right? To be honest, and this is obviously hindsight is 2020, but if you're trying to get players to leave a certain area and you have a dungeon that's literally chock-a-block full of unkillable monsters, sick a couple after them. Because sometimes when you get into combat and you're like, oh, this isn't beatable.
Have a monster come in and deal 90% damage to the barbarian. Then you can make your party mess their pants and run.
This took several sessions. Eventually, the party started to grumble at me. Why are we down here? I finally just said, look, if y'all like this place or don't want to make your characters decide to leave and want there to be something to do here, I'll add something. But as of right now, there is nothing to do here. Like I've been saying, do you want me to change that? Everyone said no. It's fine the way it is. Okay. They kept exploring it, and the next session, they again got frustrated that it seemed pointless. I again confirmed that it is and offered to retcon that. No real response. The game ended after an unrelated argument that I've already posted about.
This is really striking me as a bit weird, and I'm going to have to fault OP a bit as a DM here. They're not taking charge of the table. I'm not saying the DM needs to be a dictator of the table, but the DM is saying, there's nothing here, do you want me to change that? Don't ask them that, just do it. Either A, give them some rewards, or B, force them to leave. You as a DM could literally say, this dungeon has some magic on it or some dimensional power, and it just ejects them.
Yeah, that's true.
You could literally write your way out of this and have them out if they were never intended to be in there to begin with. Yes, you're not supposed to railroad players, but this is honestly putting them back into the actual world you created.
Yeah. Or even to prevent any and all of this, you could have had the door there with a magical seal on it that had like a super high DC.
Or an unopenable door. Make it impossible to open. Just say, this is a thing, it exists.
I mean, aren't all doors unopenable in D&D?
The real BBEG of every campaign.
The way I see this, the likely possibilities as to why they were doing this are 1. They knew what they were doing, and I just didn't trust them on that. I interpreted in-character frustrations as out-of-character ones. The players wanted to see what was up, and they were role-playing that out. For the record, I don't think this is due to some comments that were made the entire time, but basically just leaving room for me to be paranoid because I get like that sometimes. 2. They kind of felt the games were coming to an end and were also participating in some amount of unconscious sabotage. 3. They were basically playing the petulant game of chicken with me to force me to change my setting to meet their behaviors, but needed it to be something that I backed down on and not an above-game compromise. 4. They just genuinely weren't grasping what I was telling them repeatedly, multiple times a session, and I majorly overestimated their ability to pay attention. I also don't think this is likely, but my frustration makes it hard for me to not include it. I did everything short of make them repeat what I was saying back to me to ensure they understood. 5. They thought that all the information was some kind of unreliable narrator gimmick. I've never given bad information on knowledge checks, and especially not above game, so I don't think it's this. I really can't help but feel it was malicious in some vague, hard-to-describe way.
Okay, there's a huge amount to unpack there. I will absolutely strike option 2. I don't think they were deliberately trying to sabotage it. That doesn't sound right. Possibly option 3 seems likely. The fundamental problem here, as I can see it, is D&D players are eternal magpies. You can't put a shiny MacGuffin like a super dungeon for the strongest unkillable monsters and a huge sign that says do not enter and expect them to just ignore that to some degree. That is too tempting. That is the big red button that says do not push. You want to push it. So I think initially, that is part of the problem. However, then they persisted. They persisted in going through the dungeon. They didn't want to leave no matter how much you told them, even out of character. So this is where the party becomes at fault. And especially when one of them was trying to basically say, give us something to leave. They probably got a bit greedy and thought, okay, we can use it to get some cool magical item and then we can leave.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was a conspiratorial thing. Like, they were like, ooh, let's hold the DM hostage. I mean, they could have done, but I'm guessing that they got in there on their own stubbornness, realized that there was nothing. They were too proud to turn around without anything, and so they just kept going, hoping that the DM would give them what they wanted so they could leave.
I don't think there is malicious intent. I don't think they were deliberately messing with OP. I just think they got into this really cool place and really expected something for it. So the party is at fault for not accepting that there was nothing here when it became apparent there was not leaving. However, I would say that DM here did definitely drop the ball. They could have authoritatively just ejected them somehow. They could have had the door be unopenable. They could have started taking damage as soon as they walked in. Every 6 seconds. Roll damage, all of you. This place is toxic to you. OP even said that the place kills these monsters slowly over time. The players as humanoid, non-monsters, could have been feeling that effects way more intensely and way less durable, and started feeling it as soon as they walked in, to the point where it would kill them in a few rounds.
I think there's blame on both sides. The DM did, and they acknowledged it at the beginning. They indulged it, and they probably should not have, and that's on them, so they got it going. Again, I would be interested to know a little bit more what's going on, just because the OP mentioned they were already frustrated with the players, so the feeling might have been mutual.
That does give the impression that there maybe already is some animosity between the DM and the party here, and so the party is just unwilling to back down.
Yeah, and that's a huge issue too. When you start having animosity between the players and the DM, the game can go off the rails really fast, because you do need to have a certain amount of trust in your DM that they're not going to have you go on pointless missions or kill you or whatever.
This ultimately comes down to the party wouldn't accept what the DM was telling, even out of character. The DM did not act authoritatively or did not act in a way to resolve the situation, instead treating it more as a negotiation with the players. Like I said, the DM isn't a dictator, but at some point you need to just close the door on your players and send them back. And especially when it was a place that was never intended to be accessible and just a cool world feature. However, creating that cool world feature and then denying your players access to it entirely, I don't like. You can't have part of the world that there is effectively a barrier to go to. It should just not exist.
Or it can exist, but just like not anywhere that they're going to go. Like they just know that there's some mythical place where certain monsters are kept to be slowly killed over time. Which sounds kind of cruel, to be honest. Hey, Hugh.
Yes, man?
What do you call a mountaintop that is guarded by rogues?
I don't know. What do you call it?
A sneak peek.
And with that, we have definitely not been two kobolds in a trench coat. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make the necessary sacrifices to Tiamat. We'll see you next time.